Okay, now I have a little after 12 o'clock and welcome to our Wacky Wednesday Lunch and Learn series. And today we have with us Mr. Stephen Smith, who is the manager at the Roughwood Seed Collection up in Pennsylvania. Stephen is a Master Gardener intern here in Montgomery County and the son of Master Gardeners. And so we are very pleased to have Stephen with us today. I'm sure he could talk for hours, but we're going to keep him to an hour today so he can tell us about his experience with seed saving and maybe hear something about his interesting trips overseas. I know he's been to Peru and different areas to collect some of these landrace varieties. So I will turn this over to Stephen. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Carla. And hello, everyone. As Carla said, I am the manager for the Roughwood Seed Collection here in Pennsylvania. We are outside of Philadelphia up here. And I'm also, I guess, going to be the new director for the new Roughwood Foundation that the seed collection will be a part of once we get everything set up and whatnot. But one of the things that we do at Roughwood is seed saving. It's one of the basically principles that we do, and Carla had sent everyone an email because a lot of you have been wanting to hear about seed saving and everything, and it's something that I do literally on a daily basis. So it's something that I enjoy doing. As Carla said, I've been to Peru. I've collected stuff in Peru. I've been to other parts of the United States and everything. We get seed all the time. Because the Roughwood Seed Collection itself that I oversee, we have 5,000 different vegetables, herbs, edible flowers, everything from all over the world. We're the largest non-government funded seed collection in Pennsylvania. We're one of the largest here in the Northeast. The seed collection was originally founded in 1932, basically during the Great Depression. And we've been keeping it going. I've been adding to it and everything. But a lot of this presentation is not necessarily full of information. It is a lot of this pictures, because pictures can tell you more than what I can say. That's always the case. A picture is worth 1,000 words, as they say. But the fundamental ideas of seed saving, sustainable food systems rely on sustainable seed systems. The current agriculture model that the world and much of the US follows is very not sustainable. It's very corrupt. It's very toxic, full of things that should not be going on, but it's just the way the world currently is. Seed is a natural resource that should be available to everyone. Our ancestors have always saved their seed. That's basically how we as humans came to be, evolved. Seed saving is also a skill that should be learned and shared. And of course, the continued practice of seed saving contributes to not only your community, but regional, national, and international seed security, because the seed, by you saving seed, it protects the natural diversity and the biodiversity that keeps our food system safe. And seed saving, even before the pandemic, was a big thing, but after the pandemic, it's gotten much bigger. But it's still an endangered tradition, because as we go into why save your own seeds, most seed companies back in the early 1900s, the 1800s, they were family owned. A lot of them have now been bought out. They've been bought out by Bayer, by Dow, Syngenta, all of these big companies that want to control the market. All the pharmaceutical companies basically control our agriculture and food system. So seed saving is a very important way, if you want to look at it as a revolution or retaliation. That's one way to save and better what you're putting in your body. Of course, a lot of the varieties that you can buy now, they're hybrids. They're more profitable because they're patented. You can't legally save seed of a lot of the stuff that is patented and that it's genetically modified. Even from 1984 to 87, 54 of the 230 mail order seed businesses in both the US and Canada were out of business. Hybrid production is actually more expensive over open pollinated heirloom seed because it takes more time, it takes more labor, more effort, more trialing, yada, yada, yada. And with hybrids and GMOs, the parents can actually be kept a secret. They don't have to foreclose what is in a particular hybrid. They can not even tell you what's in it. And in the heirloom world, we try to be open as we can and know if it is a hybrid, what's in it, where it came from. A lot of hybrids that you can obtain, they can actually be sterile because they were genetically created to be sterile. Or if they're F1 hybrids, which a lot of your tomatoes that you buy at the store and in seed packets, the seed you save will not be what you get the next year. It will be something completely different because it'll revert back to whatever parents were put into that said tomato. And an even more scary fact is that since 1983, we've lost 93% of all vegetable varieties once offered for sale to the public. And basically all of these were heirlooms. And again, as I said earlier, saving your own seeds is an important part of biodiversity. And this is an even scarier fact when you look at it, that between 1903 and 1983, we had 307 sweet corn varieties available, 434 field corn, 497 lettuce, over 500 cabbage, over 300 squash, over 200 cucumbers, over 500 green beans, garden beans. And you see in 1983, we only had 12 of those sweet corns left. We had 40 of those field corns, 36 of those lettuces, 28 of the cabbage, 40 of the squash, 16 of the cucumbers, and 32 of the beans. So we have lost a terribly lot of seed, and that's why seed saving is so important, because a lot of these varieties, and like what we have at Roughwood, if someone loses them, or if we would lose them, they're extinct permanently. And you've lost a very vital part of the biodiversity, which is what these pictures here showcase. Various corns, flowers, squash, radishes, beans. These are all green beans and lima beans, tomatoes, more beans and lima beans. And this is the biodiversity that exists in the world. These are not Photoshopped. These are true colors, true depiction of what they are. This is why seed saving is so important, because you're not only preserving something beautiful, but you're keeping everything else going as well. These are turmerics that we sell, that we offer, that are blue inside. We have some ginger that is black. And this is a better picture. These are all different types of turnips and radishes that you as a gardener can grow and save your seed from. These are all heirloom. These are all land-raised varieties that have been selected and grown for hundreds of years, thousands of years in some case, depending on where you are. But when you're seed saving, you have basically three choices. You can go with OP, which is an abbreviation for open pollinated. These are basically like populations that have been put together. The seed produced will closely resemble the parents that you get when you plant it. They're a result of combining parents that are similar, or in other cases, not similar. The plants will usually look like what you grew last year. Heirlooms are also non-hybrid, open pollinated varieties that have been passed down from generation to generation. 50 years or more is the general census for heirlooms. Really, that can be debated. We at Roughwood prefer to just consider something an heirloom that we can fully document and fully prove that the history we got is true, because with some heirlooms you can't do that. And if you plant heirlooms, the seed you grow and save for the next season, it will look like what you grew last year. And as I said earlier, with hybrids or F1s, they're the result of controlled crossing, of usually inbreeding, which we will get into. Genetically distinct parent populations, the seeds saved will be very different than their parents, and only a few plants, or none at all, may even look like what you're growing. And this is an example of an heirloom. This is our lemon blush tomato, an heirloom that was grown in the 1800s, early 1900s. It was extinct for over 200 years that we have now reintroduced the world to. It's a low acid tomato that tastes like, it has a very citrus floral flavor to it. It's good for baking. This is a flower corn variety that I created that is an open pollinated type. This is a new pepper that we are experimenting with that my dad, he was a master gardener that Carla mentioned. He breeds stuff for us. This is an open pollinated pepper, sweet pepper variety that we are hoping to offer for sale this fall. And then this is your Sunny Boy, Lemon Boy tomato. It has different names depending on which company is offering it. It is an F1 hybrid, so what you plant may or may not look like that the next season. A lot of these hybrids like this, even if they look yellow when you plant them, you may get red tomatoes, you may get purple tomatoes. It just depends on whatever is in the background, but they will not come true from seed. You can create your own new variety out of those tomatoes, but it will not look like what you plant. And that's the whole point of heirlooms and open pollinated seed, is you want it to look like what you plant because you have greater control over the selection that you've done or someone else has done for flavor, for vigor, for adaptation to your climate, etc. These are generally the easiest types of crops to save your own seed from, because these are mostly self-pollinating, meaning they do not easily pollinate by bees, by wasps, by wind, etc. For those of you that know what Jerusalem artichokes are, they're a wild sunflower that was commonly cultivated by a lot of the Native Americans. Cardoons, endive, artichokes, lettuce, salsify, sunflowers, arugula, rutabagas, beans, peas, lentils, soybeans, sorghum, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, tomatillos, and ground cherries are generally all easy for the home gardener or anyone that wants to save their own seed from. They're less complicated. And these also are generally easy to save seed from because these are either self-sterile, that are not as easily outbreeding or cross-pollinating. Chives, garlic, leeks, onions, amaranths, beets and chard, auroch, quinoa, spinach, other lamb's quarters, carrots, celery, caraway, chervil, cilantro, dill, fennel, parsley, and parsnips. Those are generally your easier to save seed from. What we call kind of advanced seed saving, where it gets a bit more tricky, is Asian greens, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, collards, kale, kohlrabi, mustards, turnips, cucumbers, gourds, loofahs, melons, pumpkins, summer and winter squash, barley, corn, millet, oat, and wheat. And that is mainly because these types of vegetables are more easily prone to crossing. You have to have a large population of them, or as one of the slides, and I will get into more then, some of these are biennial, and that's something that you should know, which is one of the most important things when you're seed saving. You need to know your plants, you need to know what you're growing, you need to know the common scientific name of what you're growing, the type of plant, whether it's an annual, a biennial, a perennial, whether it's cool season, warm season, because if you plant a tomato like right now, it will not do well. It will probably die because things like tomatoes and peppers, most solanums are warm season plants. They do not like cold weather. They are not cool season. Broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, spinach, and everything are good cool seasons that would be great to have in your garden right now. Most of your crops that you're going to save seed from are annuals. Only when you get into certain herbs and flowers, and some vegetables are perennial, like rhubarb, and others are like cabbage and cauliflower and kale. They're all biennial, meaning they take 2 seasons to produce. The first year they will be leaves, which you can eat, and then the following season, after they've had a cold period, they will bloom and you can save seed of them. You also need to know their reproduction, how they pollinate, the flower types, etc. You definitely need to know isolation and purity distances and how many plants you need. Because in seed saving, that's a very critical part. Again, with names, common names are not always helpful. We have lettuces in the seed collection that we have done the research. We have one lettuce that has about 200 or 300 different aliases, different synonymous names that particular lettuce has gone by over the course of it being offered for sale. So common names are not always helpful. Scientific names are usually more helpful, usually a bit more complicated, probably not easily pronounced unless you're good at Latin. But you need to know both because they are vital to the seed saver, especially with scientific names. Plants within a species can cross, and certain interspecies, different species can also cross. Common names are easier for the average gardener, but can be complicated, or again, as I just mentioned, very synonymous. Scientific names are better for more detailed note-taking and keeping in mind how to save your seed. And this is part of knowing your plants about the scientific names. You need to know what family they're in because most plants, this is basic botany that most master gardeners should already have had a class on. I think I actually did part of this for the basic botany. So an example would be the Cucurbitaceae family, which contains squash, melons, cucumbers, all your gourds. Members of the same species will accept pollen from other types of the same species and varieties within that species. For the most part, different species of cucumbers and different species of melons and different species of squash will not interpollinate with each other. You cannot have a squash cross-pollinate with a cucumber or a melon or vice versa. That is literally not possible by the laws of nature. That's just not, that cannot happen. Now you can have two cucumbers cross, two squash cross, or two melons cross, or two gourds, but you cannot have anything of each of those crossing with each other. It's just not possible. Because again, we'll go with like Cucurbita pepo, which is your common summer squash, black beauty, zucchini, yellow crookneck, Connecticut field pumpkin, patty pan, scallop squashes, spaghetti squash. All of those are the same species. They're just different varieties and different types of squash. So this is where it can get complicated, but you need to still understand and have some kind of name for the seed that you're saving, which will be important when we get to that point. Knowing your plant's reproduction, again, a species is defined as a group of individuals that are able to reproduce together. In the garden, most of what you're going to be growing are different species, but not always. Example, there are several species of squash and 2 distinct species of kale, meaning that some of these will not be able to cross-pollinate with each other and others will be able to. It just depends on what you're growing. And then with pollination and your flower structures of what you're growing, some plants are naturally inbreeding, meaning they self-pollinate and cross-pollination is of little to no concern. Other plants are where they easily cross with each other and you must isolate and distance them from each other, either hand pollinate or provide barriers to prevent crossing. If you want to think of it, you can think of the ones that easily cross. They're more promiscuous than your self-pollinating plants. Inbreeding, again, are self-pollinating. They're self-compatible. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, green beans, wheat, oats, okra for the most part, cowpeas, barley. These plants can generally be planted close together between varieties with little to no crossing. If you are concerned with purity of your variety, anywhere from 5 to 20 feet between these varieties can be utilized. And this is a picture of a tomato flower. And things like peas, especially peas, tomatoes, beans, and peppers, and cowpeas, the flowers have already pollinated before they even open. That's why they're considered self-pollinating. You can have bees sometimes visit your flowers, but it's rare because they generally do not produce nectar because they have been selected by we humans to be inbreeding, so they don't require outside pollination. It's kind of our domestication factor. Outbreeding vegetables are insect or wind pollinated, and they generally require a larger population to maintain a viable gene pool. Squash, pumpkins, gourds, kale, cabbage, collards, broccoli, onions, cauliflower, mustards, turnips, radishes, corn, melons, and cucumbers are generally in this group. A lot of these may require hand pollination, some sort of barrier or distance between varieties to ensure their purity. They will cross very easily with each other, and you will be having a hard time keeping them pure. This is a squash that has been in North America for probably close to 5 or 10,000 years. It's one of the original summer squash. It's where all of your zucchini come from, all of your patty pans, spaghetti squash. This is one of the original ancestors, and this is a variety that's been exclusive to us here at Roughwood that we have stewarded and saved seed from to keep going because it is such a vital, important variety. And part of what I was getting into was what we call variety maintenance. Some of what you're going to grow will have a hard time producing good, viable seed if you don't have enough plants. Others, like a tomato, you can get thousands of seed from one plant of a tomato because they produce a lot of fruit. If your population is too small, there may be some genetic diversity that is lost, and especially over many generations, this will result in what we call inbreeding depression. You'll basically notice a decrease in your plant's vigor. It'll get shorter and weaker. You'll lose a lot of flavor and climate adaptation traits that it may have had. Germination will go down, and yield will also be going down as well. In order to produce seeds that are true to type, aka pure, you must intervene within your own garden and follow isolation protocols and ensure that they grow enough. Ensure that you, or if you work for a community garden or something, they grow enough of a variety to keep it genetically viable. Because again, if you lose the diversity that we're trying to keep going within all of these heirlooms and land races and everything, it's a threat to not only keeping the variety going, but again, it's a threat to keeping our food security safe, our agriculture safe. Because if the genetics are too bad and too slim, with especially things like genetically modified corn nowadays, all of that traces back to just about 3 or 4 varieties of corn that are used to create all of these different hybrids. If we were to have some kind of global pandemic of agriculture, it would only take one disease or one insect to wipe out basically all of the corn crop all over the world, depending on what it would be. And these heirlooms and everything have a good genetic basis. They have tolerance, they have resistance, they can adapt. These hybrids that you can purchase, these GMOs, they don't have that ability. They're set to produce and do what they were programmed to do. They have no way of adapting themselves to a new climate, to another bug, insect, a disease, or anything. That's why we at Roughwood promote heirlooms. And again, you cannot save genetically modified seed. If you save genetically modified corn, wheat, or soybeans, you will probably get a lawsuit put against you because the companies can sue you for that if they find out that you're saving seed, because they own the variety, they own the genetics, they own the patents, and you can be sued, and they can basically take everything to your name. A lot of that has been in the news over the last 3 or 4 years of people. Some people have won cases against it, but others have lost everything to it. And with things like lettuce and peas, all that you may need in order to keep a variety pure and good genetics is just keeping some extra space between them. And again, for others, you may need more advanced, including larger isolation, pollination barriers, or hand pollination. This isolation by distance is usually the easiest thing and is preferred by most gardeners. Basically, you would plant one variety at one end of your garden or one side of your house, and you'd plant another on the opposite side of the garden, at the opposite side of the house, the field, wherever you're growing it. Or you can just simply space them out in the beds or areas according to their isolation distances, which I do have in slides. And you can also do what we call time isolation. You basically delay the planting of certain varieties like corn or sorghum or something by anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks to allow one to flower and pollinate and go to seed before the other is able to. This is generally a good way, but with the way the climate has currently shifted, that's not always reliable because I have delayed certain corn varieties by even planting some, say now, and planting another one a month later, and they still tassel and silk at the same time. The weather has a lot to do with all of this. And this is just some of the examples of, this is taken from Seed Savers Exchange. This goes through basically nearly any crop you could want. It actually tells you the species, the family, if they're annual or perennial, their pollination method, the isolation distance for seed saving, how many viable seeds you could need, how many plants you need for variety maintenance, and how many plants you need to preserve the genetics itself. And this is all available on Seed Savers Exchange on their website. I think I have a direct link to this that I can put in the chat when we shift over to everything. But you can find all of this on their website because it does go through everything. Basically anything you could want to know, it goes through, and this will be recorded, so all of you can always come back to this and pause at these sections if you want to write this down. This is a PDF, I believe, on Seed Savers Exchange website, so it would probably be easier if you just went there and printed it off, because that's just usually the way that I do it, and that because a lot of this we have in our head, but not everyone has it in that sense. But again, it literally goes through basically everything you would want to know. And this is an example of what I was calling a pollination barrier. It could be a forest, a woodland, a patch of wildflowers, tall grass, a house, a shed, a building, something that would basically not only keep the pollen from drifting onto other plants, but also keeping things like bees or wasps or whatever away from your plants as well. You can also either purchase special tents or cages for isolating certain crops like lettuce and everything. Seed Savers Exchange offers lettuce, what they call lettuce tents. But some of them can be costly or problematic if you don't put them together right. If you have a thunderstorm or something, we had a hurricane here last year. You could end up having them fly into your neighbor's yard or something. You could do large frames, whether they're wood, plastic, metal, wire, whatever. You can also build your own, like in this picture. You can get spun polyester cloth window screen, or a real easy way is to get wooden posts, metal stakes or something, and get mosquito netting, and just build yourself a little tent around your whatever you're wanting to save seed from. And basically you would do this, you would alternate between which ones you're going with, you're wanting to save seed from. For 2 or 3 days, you'd put it over one variety. For another 2 or 3 days, you would put it over a different variety to let them be able to pollinate by insect for the ones that need, because this is only for insect pollination, basically. But it all depends. This is another example. You can get little bags that you put over like your tomato flowers and everything. Since they are self-pollinating, you can get other bags to put over like sunflowers. I would suggest something more breathable than what this person did in this picture, because this can cause your seed heads to rot. You can also do hand pollination for like squash and everything. A lot of you may have problems with not getting a good fruit set on your zucchini and everything. We used to have a native species of bee that was called a squash bee that migrated from Mexico when squash, and some of them were native here because squash has been here in North America, in the US, since about 10,000 years ago. So they were already here, but with the way urbanization and everything, it's drove a lot of those species extinct. And they were what pollinated the squash. But certain things like corn, melons, gourds, and squash, you can actually pollinate by hand. It is not hard, but it can be laborious if you're trying to save seed from a lot of varieties. For example, with squash, we have about 200 different varieties of squash in the Roughwood collection that we have to either grow at opposite ends of the garden, have other people help grow, or that we hand pollinate like this picture. And there's tons of videos available on YouTube and everything. We're going to hopefully be able to put out some videos through Roughwood this year, hopefully, about how to hand pollinate stuff. But you basically take the female squash flowers, which you see here that have the baby squash at the end of them. You tape them shut the night before, close pin them shut, and the following morning you would go out and break off the male flowers, break off all the petals, so you have the anther that has all of the pollen on it. And you would basically dab onto the female flower. You'd rip the tape off, dab it on, reseal it, and you basically did what a bee would do. And if you have low success on getting your fruits on cucumbers or squash or something, this is something you can do not only to save seed, but just increase how much you get out of what you're growing. One of the other most important things about saving seeds, you need to know when your seed is mature. If you harvest when they're too early, your seeds will obviously be immature. They will not usually be viable. And waiting too long may make them moldy and also non-viable. So picking them at prime maturity is very, very important. For crops that produce what we call wet fruits, the seeds are not always mature when they're ready to eat. This is like eggplants, cucumbers, summer squash. You normally pick these all before they're mature. They're still edible when they're young. Most of these are like eating bricks, especially with like a lot of summer squash and everything. They're not really that edible when you're letting them go to seed, or if you let them go to seed and try to eat them, they can be bitter. Things like radishes, once they usually flower and everything, they can get hot and whatnot. But with things like the eggplants and cucumbers and squash, you need to leave some of these on your plants in your garden so they will mature. Most will grow quite large, and they usually will turn yellow when they're ripe. They will not still be green. Even eggplants usually they either turn yellow or they become real squishy when they're ready to be cut open for seed saving. For things like dry fruited, like grains, lettuce, beans, they can just be removed when your pods are dry. This is like marigold flowers. This is some that we have in the collection used for Day of the Dead ceremonies from Mexico. You want to let them go to seed. You want to let them dry out completely before you harvest them. This is okra. Most of you pick okra when it's still green in order to eat it. But if you want to save seed from okra, you need to let it dry. And they will either split open like this, or they will begin to look like these weird UFO arc forms, if you will, here with this variety that we grew before you save seed. With things again like beans and cowpeas, black-eyed peas, you want the pods to go completely brown. They would generally be kind of crispy, and that's when you can pick them and shell them in whatever way you want to shell them, or do whatever you want to do with them. This is a summer squash, what they call finger fruit squash, finger squash. From up here, you would eat these like you would your zucchini, but these are mature. These are about the size of a basketball. You can't tell it in the picture, but they're about the size of a basketball. And that's one of the ones you will want to let, like your other squash and everything, you will need to let mature before you harvest for seed. These are peas. Most of us eat peas as snap peas or snow peas. Other peas, you can actually eat the pea plant, pea greens themselves. But if you're saving seed, this goes for beans, green beans too, and lima beans. You want to let the pods basically turn this color or begin to turn yellow before you harvest them. If you pick them any sooner, there would be nothing but a green bean and the seed won't be You can generally leave these out on your plants, but if you're going to have a rainy spell or something, you can always pick them, bring them inside, let them dry. We're going to get into that shortly. And this is another example of some of the summer squash that we grew. These are basically now matured. They're ready to be cut open. They've turned yellow-orange. These two here are kind of actually molding. And you have to let the seed get completely viable, because if you don't, they just won't be viable. Now we're going to get into seed saving and processing. You also need to know how to harvest seeds. There's, again, dozens of videos available for this. And again, your garden crops can be either dry or wet fruited. Collecting from dry can, again, be as simple as going out to the garden, picking mature seed pods, bringing them into the house for further drying and cleaning and processing. Wet fruited, like the tomatoes and everything, cucumbers, you have to pick the fruits when you've let them mature. These are generally cut open, and the seeds are extracted from the pulp before they are dried. This is an example of drying seed. This is pearl millet. Again, you pick it by hand when dry. You can shake it into bags or buckets. We at Roughwood usually put a lot of stuff in buckets or in bags and set it out in the sun for a few days in the greenhouse, whatever. You can pull the plants up and hang them upside down like these. Or you can even lay a tarp below the plant and shake it to release the seed. For certain things, we have to do that with, because it's just easier. Because with things like basil, if you even touch the plant, the seed will fall all over the ground. So sometimes it's easier to just lay a tarp beneath something. Wet seeded things you should let mature on the vine as long as possible before harvesting. The seed will actually continue to grow, mature, and improve in quality for days to weeks after the first fruit is edible. With things like tomatoes, you want to let them get ripe and squishy before you cut them open. With squash, depending on what kind of squash or pumpkin you're growing, it can take anywhere from a couple weeks for them to mature once you pick them, all the way up to 3 or 4 months. A lot of these squash were originally selected to be winter squash, meaning they will store for 3 or 4, 5, 6 months. So you need to keep this in mind when you're growing stuff. And with things like tomatoes and cucumbers, you have to ferment the seed. And fermenting, basically, it helps to clean and sort out the viable seed from the immature non-viable. This ensures you're saving the best possible seed. It also eats away the protective mucus that's on tomato seeds and cucumbers. I'm sure you've seen it. When you've cut open tomatoes, there's this real mucusy goo. That is a germination inhibitor. And if you don't ferment your tomato seed, your tomatoes may not germinate for up to a year or two, because that's how strong that germination mucus protectant is. You can do this for ground cherries, again, cucumbers, melons, and certain eggplants. And this is an example of what you do. You basically cut open your tomatoes or cucumbers. You put them in jars or plastic cups. You de-seed all of it. You keep out as much of the actual chunkiness as you can. You just want the seed and mucus. You'll fill your jars up 3/4 to nearly full of just water, and you will let them sit. And they will mold like they have in the picture. And the mold and bacteria that grow on these is what eats away that mucus. And you would generally do this for about 1 to 2 weeks. I do not recommend doing it in your house unless you have a fan or it's very ventilated and you can open the windows, because when you do this, it will stink to high heaven. We have a shed here at Roughwood that we use, that we do this in, and when you open it, it just takes your breath away, because it will smell awful because you're fermenting these things. And after the 1 to 2 weeks, you can use a strainer that you cook with. I would not recommend using the same one to make pasta with the next night, because you will regret it. And you will wash off all the gunk and mold and everything. And you will let the seeds set out for another 2 to 3 weeks to completely dry before you save seed. And this fermentation also gets rid of certain viruses and bacteria and fungi that may be in your seed that you don't know about. the bacteria and everything will eat it away. And if you have a cat like we used to, this is dear little Satramo, he always enjoyed watching us save seed. Um, and this is a closer picture of fermenting tomatoes. You can see that you can do this different ways. You can put them in jars, you can put them in containers and cover them with plastic wrap. Whatever you want to do. But yeah, as Carl has said, this is why certain seeds are expensive. When you do tomatoes and stuff, it is a labor of love because it is a long, tedious process. The tomato seeds that you buy at the store or from people like us at Roughwood or other seed companies, we've already gone through this laborious, tedious process of doing this. When you save seed, it's not a wham bam, you have seed the next day. For beans and things, it's like that. But for other things, it's not. And then this is a way to do peppers. You can cut open your peppers and take the seed out that way, like most of us do if we're doing baked peppers or something. But generally that's a headache. So what we do at Roughwood and what my dad does and what other growers do for us is we put them in the blender. I would have a separate blender designated for this purpose, especially if you're doing hot tomatoes. You can imagine why. You fill them up with water. You grind them very carefully. You only do it in certain pulses. And all you want to do is grind up the tomato itself. And then you can go in and wash out the bits of fruit and everything once you've done this. Peppers do not have to be fermented. You can if you want to, but you can generally just do this. If you get a strainer with big enough holes, the seed will stay in the container and the pulp and fruit and everything that you grind up will fall out. And after you've done all of this, this is us drying. We recycle because we have pet dogs. We use little Caesar dog food containers, recycle them for seed for drying seeds. We use old plastic containers and everything. It's really up to you what you want to dry your seed in. You can even do what my dad does and put them in the greenhouse if you have a greenhouse and let them dry because they dry quicker in the heat. But you have to be sure that you won't have squirrels or mice get into your seed because that's a problem. We've had that happen. And they need to be in a very well ventilated area because otherwise they will mold. We generally don't recommend putting paper towels in unless you have a fan going because the excess moisture in the paper towel can cause mold. And again, I can't stress enough, label, 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 label. We at Roughwood run into issues when we forget to label what we just put in a jar or that we just set in a container. Because if you're like me, I have 5,000 things going on at once, and I will remember for the first day or two what is in that jar or container, and then after that, I have no idea what it is besides a tomato or pepper or something. And again, record keeping is your best friend. It is something that we are very passionate about at Roughwood because when you record, you can record when your plant's flowered, when you save the seed, when you harvested, when it's mature, all of this. As long as you label, it doesn't really matter how you do it. You can get like Avery labels and stick to your jars, excuse me. Or you can get little pieces of paper, put into a bag or something. An ideal label, and this is mainly for when you've dried your seed. You want what the name of the variety is, scientific name. If you so choose, the harvest date, the population size, you save your seeds from, how many plants, and where you got your seed from. Because not every seed you get from each seed company, even if it says, say, Cherokee Purple Tomato, they all will not look the same. Each company and each grower selects their seed differently. So it's important to be able to compare, especially if you're wanting to have pure stock of something, or if your family has had an heirloom seed for generations. You want to be sure that it's the same thing each year. And drying your seeds, again, we recommend drying your seed for a minimum of 2 weeks in a well-ventilated area. It should be warm and dry, not humid, or have any hot or cold extremes, because this can actually ruin your seed. A drying rack, a shelf, a table are all good options. You may use a small fan, as I've said earlier, to help dry them faster. Plastic trays or containers work best. You can use baking pans. Again, don't use the same baking pans that you're going to bake a cake in or cookies the next day, because they will not taste or probably smell very good. You can use parchment or wax paper. Paper towels, again, they may stick to your wet seeds and be a pain to get off. When we use paper towels, they usually stick to the seed, and it's a headache to try to get them undone. And ideally, you want to try to dry your seeds down to about 8% moisture. How do you know they're at 8%? You can actually get the seed tested, or they should be dry and crumbly to the touch once they're fully dry. If the seed itself comes apart, you don't need to be saving the seed because it's not viable. And this is how we dry at Roughwood. These are germination trays. We set them in the dining room. These are beans. You can see some tomatoes that we have put on paper towels that we've dried off. We have melons here. And this is a good way to do it. This is another picture of the same thing, kind of blurry. But we had a fan going in here. It was warm, and the seeds are able to be well ventilated so they don't mold or rot. And this is a way that you can get your seed separated from chaff, or trash, as we also call it in the seed world. This is like a hand screen that you can get. You can get various types of these from different seed companies. You may even be able to get them from some hardware stores. Make your own, or just use something you have for straining pasta if you're on a tight budget. That's often what we've done. Basically, you would put your seeds in. This is like lettuce. The bigger stuff will stay at the top, and the seeds will actually fall through and be at the bottom, which is what you want. For beans, it can be as easy as you actually just shelling all of the beans out, or running them over trays like this, and breaking the pods open. The seeds will fall through. Of course, you will want a separate tray for each variety of bean. Unless you're growing a bean medley like in this picture, you will want to keep your beans separate. You don't want to mix your seed together because a lot of seeds look alike. And these are seed screens that we are offering through Roughwood, that we are offering for sale. My dad has actually built these himself for us specifically. And these can do anywhere from seed as small as amaranth, quinoa, all the way up to beans and peas and everything. We are selling them as a set. Storing your seeds is also important. They're happiest when they're stored in a cool, dark, and dry place, a dark closet, pantry, cooler part of the house. If your basement is not moist or humid, that's also a good place you can put them. Once properly dried, your seeds can be, again, labeled, and put in an airtight container, and stored in your closet or something at what I guess you could call typical climate, your air temperature. Most seeds will be viable in that way for about 1 to 2 to 3 years. What we recommend at Roughwood is storing your seed in the refrigerator, and you could even get a fridge or a freezer specifically for your seed saving, which is what we do, or designate part of your already utilizing freezer and everything for seed saving as well. But we strongly recommend you store your dried seed in the freezer, because when you store your dried seed in the freezer, your seed will remain viable for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. My dad has had corn and tomato seed that he has had in the freezer for 30, 40 years. And when you take it out, thaw it, and plant it, the germination is just like it's fresh seed. There's no problem. Freezing does not hurt your seed. If they are moist, however, it will hurt your seed. That's why you have to be sure they're dry. But again, the freezer is your best bet. And not only does it keep your seeds basically dormant, asleep for long periods of time. It also can kill viruses, fungi, bacteria, and insects that may have gotten in your seed either when you harvested or when you were drying them. And this is just examples of different ways that you can store your seeds when you save them. This is all different ways that we store stuff at Roughwood. We try to use either bags for like corn and beans, or most of the seed collection is in these jars that you can see. They're labeled not only on top, but also on the packet, as you can see with the brown English pea. We have a lot code, where it was grown, the year it was grown. And if you start saving a lot of varieties, or if you get obsessed with seed saving and want to start your own seed library like we did at Roughwood with all of what we grow, you will actually want to start putting with your varieties ID codes of what they are, because that's what we identify what we're growing. Like the winter pea here is P57. The English pea would have one. We're redoing our cataloging. The old pepper pot pepper is pepper 15. You don't have to do that if you're only doing a few varieties, but if you start getting a lot of seed, you probably should start coming up with some simple method of doing it. And again, every seed has a different longevity based on how it is stored. This is a general rule for seeds that last about a year: onions, parsley, parsnip, salsify, 2 years, dandelions. They are edible. That's why they're in here. They're medicinal. They were brought over originally to be eaten and used in medicine. They're not the weed that we identify them as today. Sweet corn and other types of corn, leeks, okra, peppers, lettuce generally last about 2 years. 3 years, asparagus, beans, carrots, celeriac, celery, chervil, Chinese cabbage, kohlrabi, peas, spinach. 4 years, beets, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, basically all of your brassicas, as we call them. Chicory, eggplants, fennel, pumpkin, squash, chard, tomatoes, turnips, watermelons. 5 years, cardoon, some collards, endive, some lettuce, muskmelons, which is melons, radishes, and watercress. And this is for like typical storage, like I was mentioning, at room temperature. For the most part, your seeds will not be generally viable for more than a year or two if your house is not, especially if your home is not air conditioned in the winter, or not winter, in the summer, because high heat ruins your seed. And try not to drop your seed either, because dropping your seed also lowers the viability of it. And again, as I said, in the freezer, your seed can last from 10 to 50 years or more, and you don't have to worry about it really going bad, unless your freezer goes bad and stops freezing and everything thaws. Then you have a problem. And this is just some sources for heirloom seed. You do need to do research about where to get seed, because after the pandemic last year, a lot of people jumped onto the seed bandwagon, and you have these very shady scam seed companies that have came to be. All of these here have existed long prior. Seed Savers Exchange, which is where you can find good seed saving information. They're also a nonprofit. We at Roughwood are as well. The Roughwood Seed Collection, there's our website. You can also buy seed from us as well. Baker Creek, Southern Seed Exposure has a lot of Southern adapted heirlooms. Portland Seed House, Fedco, Territorial. And again, there's dozens more. This is just some of the real good ones that I know the people that operate them and that we've got seed from that are just real good sources to purchase from. Because we at Roughwood have our own store. We're selling a bunch of different things right now. And then this is, if any of you are on Facebook and want to keep up to date with what we do at Roughwood, if you ever have questions, there's my personal Facebook, there's my personal email. If any of you use Instagram or social media, that's my Instagram, and that's our Instagram our Instagram username on Roughwood, for Roughwood on Instagram. So does anyone have any questions or anything? Because I think I timed that just about right.
That was a lot of information. I'm sorry, that was a lot of information, and I really appreciate it. I know nothing about storing seeds. So I wonder, is there any way that you might be able to make those slides available to Carla? Because I couldn't get it all down that I was trying to take some of those notes on?
Yes, I will attempt to find a way to email her the presentation as well.
Okay.
That way she has it. Because it is a lot. And again, a lot of it, I could have went into more detail, but for time's sake, because I needed to cover what I needed to cover. So.
Well, thank you very much. That was a great presentation.
Yes, Stephen, we can work. I can probably send you an invite from my Google Drive.
Okay, yeah,
You upload your presentation there because it probably won't come through email. It'd be too large, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But yeah.
It'd be too large. So we can do Google Drive. That works too.
Okay, and I'll share the recording with everyone also. So, all right, any other questions? I don't really see anything in the chat box. I think a couple things just popped up. Thank yous. Thank you for the explanation on when seeds are mature. Just went through and tossed my immaturely harvested seeds from last year.
Yeah, and it's hard to explain when something is mature. That's why I use pictures, because it's easier for people to see and compare than try to explain it. Because I usually am like, well, let me show you, because it's just the easiest way to do it. But yeah, if any of you have saved seeds and they're not mature, you probably should toss them out. Most things in the seed world you can obtain again, unless you're in a case like we are, and a lot of, if we lose what we have, it's extinct and there's no getting it back. But
yeah,
most people, that's not their problem. So
yeah, what you're doing is very important. I mean, I guess I never really thought of how in-depth it was, so that was kind of eye-opening, everything that you all go through to make sure, you know, that everybody has access to these seeds. So that is really good.
A lot of people think that it's real simple for us to be able to just offer the stuff online, and you and now everyone else that sees this, they now know what we go through in order to make it happen. Because it's not a 1, 2, 3 process. It's a 1, 2, 3, 10, 20 step process before we can even get any seeds available for everyone to be able to grow and purchase and everything. But yeah, it's a lot to do at times, but most home gardeners are not like growing 5,000 different things. So.
Exactly. Okay, any other questions or comments before I stop the recording?